Right. So just as you've seen in the previous video, I'm just immediately after the rapé, I'm just going to talk because I don't know how this will turn out because I tend to fork off to the left. I tried to do this video earlier, but after the previous rapé, I just was still trying to formulate my thoughts on ceremony 28 for me, which was on my 58th birthday. So last 23rd is the 29th today, or the 30th. No, so it's Friday today, so it was last Saturday. Again, a really different and very important ceremony for me, number 28, because it was different. And the reason it was different was after ceremony 27, and talking to Yana, Yana and Mira being the ayahuasca shamans, who are absolutely beautiful people from the Czech Republic. They've worked a lot with the Shwama people. So the ayahuasca here in Ecuador is very different from Peruvian, say, Shipibo. The ayahuasca brew is slightly different as well. It's a lot. It was so strong here. So for ceremony 28, I was the only one who was doing what's called raw ayahuasca, which doesn't have chacruna in it. So they did me last because they wanted to get the ceremony started, and everyone else had the normal ayahuasca, and they had a big cup, and I'm like a little. It was like a little stone vessel, sort of this round, so slight curve in it, but it was full. You know, they had a really big dose, and it was really treacly thick. Because I had it later, about 4 hours after my first ayahuasca of the raw ayahuasca. And Yana was absolutely correct. She'd explained to me, she said, because you get so cold and because of what you're carrying and have been carrying, the way ayahuasca affects, because everybody gets a chill usually on ayahuasca, your body gets cold. Even in Peru, in the hot countries, everywhere, people can get a really cold chill, which is why everyone has blankets, which is part of, even if there's fear from your trauma, ayahuasca will set that off. As I've said before, a big part of many of the medicines is reliving some of the physical effects of trauma, but under the influence of the plant medicines, it's kind of marked for removal. Although I won't say it's not like removing, like taking it from you completely, because it's part of you, as it's been all of your life. So the way I view it now is it's like being put into a Pandora's box with the ayahuasca lock on it, so that you don't suffer from these anymore. But of course, you can break your magic if you drink too much alcohol, for example. This is a really, it's quite, not common, but some people who have had that kind of past, which I heard a story about in Peru, of a girl who's a bit of a sort of a rocky poppy kind of world singer, and she was used to sort of a certain amount of drugs and alcohol, and she did an ayahuasca ceremony for a week or two. But the first week after, when you're supposed to be really taking care of yourself, she went out with some people, had a few drinks, and then obviously had a big party night, and she ended up in hospital like I did in Mankara, and was very ill and thought she was going to die. Like I was convinced I was going to die in Mankara when that happened to me. But anyway, what the raw ayahuasca is, it's just the ayahuasca root, the vine, put into water, and it's almost fermenting. I don't know how long, but they brought that brew along specifically for me that night. And I had a massive one of those tin, like camping mugs, like this round, and about sort of 4 inches high, and it was nearly full. It was such a large amount, but it's very watery. It's a very light brown liquid in the clear plastic bottle. And when she handed me the cup, I'm looking at this cup going, I said, all of it in one go? And she said, yeah. And it's like, oh, shit. But it doesn't taste anywhere near as bad. It's just she just said, it's okay. It tastes quite good. So, it tastes okay. So started drinking it. It's much more watery. So I just kept glugging, and it seemed to go on for ages. One mouthful after the next, just trying to glug. Oh, God, this is fucking huge. Glug. But anyway, got it down, and then the rest of them were starting to lay down on their mat. And then all the lights were turned off. And she was absolutely right. I dressed really warm for that night, but I didn't have any of the chill. But consequently, because there's no chacruna in it, there's I didn't feel cold at all. I just felt a really nice normal body temperature. And then I kind of had the advantage of seeing the effects of the strong ayahuasca on everybody else. And after, I don't know, an hour or maybe more, there was a round of puking, you know, with everybody else. And it was quite amusing for me just to be sitting there in the dark, listening to everybody set each other off, the other 5 of them or however. Yeah, because there's 6 of us. Plus, obviously, the shamans take some of the ayahuasca every ceremony as well to help them with seeing the condition of everybody and what needs purging. So it was quite pleasant, but reasonably short-lived. I got an effect. There were no visuals for me, but everyone else really got some really strong visuals that night. And probably after 2 or 3 hours, you know, I felt pretty straight. And Yana had said to me, she said, later on after this, after the first glass of the raw ayahuasca, you can take the normal stuff. And it's a long night, you know, and part of me is thinking, oh, shit, you know, still, do I really need it? But then once I'd really come down, I was just bored. But the only effect that remains from even the raw ayahuasca was when I went up to walk, and I went for a pee, and I felt a little bit stomach discomfort, so I went out for a pee, and just before, and was determined to puke something up because my stomach wanted to get something out. So I stuck my fingers down my throat, and I did puke just a little bit, but with nothing in our stomachs because we hadn't eaten since lunchtime. The ceremony started a bit earlier that night, 9 o'clock. But we still have to go right the way through the night, and then you're lucky if you get any sleep at all. But usually really late in the night. So for me, after about 4 hours, no less, probably 2 hours, I was straight. And then I think I was I don't think I can't remember now, but whether anyone else had a second glass of that second ceremony, because it was really strong for everybody, and they, you know, there was a lot of puking for everybody, and so I don't think anyone else had another glass. Maybe Martin did. Had a couple of trips to the bog for a crap, as did Martin. I think I went 3 times that night because you know, but we hadn't eaten. So it's particularly strong at these ceremonies because you've gone such a long time. Unlike to Peru, where you have lunch at maybe 1 o'clock and then the ceremony starts at 7:30. We went through to 9, so your stomach's really empty at this point. So the ayahuasca's got a clean route through with no food in the way at all, being later. And then, of course, we're not, even if everybody falls asleep, including the shamans that get some sleep on these nighttime ceremonies or all-night ceremonies. And then, again, being woken up just as you've sort of fallen asleep. And then for me, waking up, I'm always groggy as hell in the mornings. And then it's like, oh, God, they bring the liquid tobacco around, which is, they just pour like a tiny little puddle in the palm of your hand. And you sniff up the liquid tobacco, which is similar to rapé in the effect. But you have to tip your head back with liquid tobacco so that it runs down the sinuses. And because you always have an intention before rapé or liquid tobacco, and ayahuasca, of course, and San Pedro, you make an intention, a little prayer, or what you're just trying to get out of it, or like your wish for what you're trying to achieve from that particular ceremony. And if it goes down the back of your throat, with liquid tobacco, you're supposed to swallow it because the principle being that you don't want to spit it out because you're spitting out your intention. So you don't want to do that, but it's pretty nasty tasting. Whereas rapé, it's fine too, because it get, you know, you with rapé you do actually spit it out because it'll get into your sinuses, and when you sniff you'll get a snot with the tobacco in it. Right now, having just done the rapé pipe, and you know, so if you get a really powerful shot, you know, your eyes can be watering, and you're like Martin was today. He took a really large amount as he was experimenting with what amount he has to put into his pipe to fill it up enough so that it gets a good blast. So he'd done the small one and only got a little bit, and then of course he loaded it, and after his one he was just like, oh, shit, man, you know. And he's really hardcore. He's very uppy, very strong spirit, carrying different trauma, but he gets a very positive spiritual buzz out of it, whereas I'm always plagued with the nausea and the feeling like shit with San Pedro. But that just the rapé today hit him, and he had to go and lie down. His eyes were all red and watering. So, you okay? And he's like, yeah, fuck, but fuck, that's strong. Because he did have a really big chunk. So he's now aware of how much he has to load his pipe to get it blown hard enough. But of course, he did he did it a little bit too much. So he went from not enough to too much in one go. Whereas you saw the amount that I did. I built up to that amount over the last 2 days to find out, just gently a little more each time, and just the method of blowing and how hard to try and get it past the nostrils and into the sinuses. So anyway, back to the ayahuasca. So after, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours or something, I was sort of completely straight. And then Yana came over. She said, "Are you ready for a second cup?" And I was sort of two minds, but I thought, fuck, it's going to be a long night. I might as well just, it's a ceremony. You've got to make the most of the cleansing while it's available for every ceremony as best as you can. So, and I was pretty straight. So I, had another cup. And I probably had a quarter or a third of what the rest of the guys did, because obviously already having had the raw ayahuasca. So I was being a bit careful. But I thought, well, I've still got to, I'm going to, and it was a very visual mix. So I got, the usual kind of visuals. Had a connection with Mama then, and a bit of a conversation, but she wasn't visually apparent for me, which, sometimes she's not so much these days. I don't get a visual, I just get the link. And maybe because the others, it was only their second ceremony. So nobody else has actually had the transcendental voice in the head yet. Because I think that's a blessing, because I've had that since my third ceremony at Capitari, after the experience of the exorcism of Jack and his 5 demons. And I think that was deserved, in my case, to just the necessity of knowing that Mama Ayahuasca exists. So people probably think, oh, you get the voices in your head, Steve. Yeah, well, that's because you're a fucking nutcase and you're probably bipolar. But, obviously it's not just me. A lot of people get that or blessed with that link. And usually, it might take people quite a few ceremonies before they get blessed with that. So I've had that from pretty early on. So I regard myself as very blessed and lucky for that, because the effect of that is sometimes it's a bit vague, but sometimes it's like you have a voice in your head, but it's your own voice. But it's like, as soon as if you ask a question, the answer is immediate in your own voice back to you. Sometimes it can explain sort of relatively complex topics, like the subject of the book by Amit Goswami on the collapse of the quantum wave function and the statistics of choosing the thought path, negative thought paths and stuff like that, to try and get your brain to be rewired so that they no longer take those old statistically proven routes of habit of bad thoughts, because they become habits, and if you're irritable, you just, your actions can, might be, oh, for fuck's sake, well, that's it. But over time and in enough medicine, hopefully those pathways are just, because you're in much more relaxed state, you're generally being so cleansed that you're losing that negativity, and your brain is being rewired with positive thoughts instead. Similar to many psychological techniques, I think I've mentioned before, like whether it's hypnotherapy or neurolinguistic programming, they all seem to work in a similar way, as far as taking those subconscious trauma memories, bringing them to the conscious mind so that you're aware of them. And in that state, it seems to work that once they're brought to the conscious mind, as the person you are now, compared to the person that suffered all that past, they're kind of marked for cleansing, although you do have to relive them. And this particular night, I had a very strong memory that I've only probably thought of once over the last few years, of a particularly traumatic event. And I got a flash of my stepfather, and because of being more positive these days, I just thought, I don't want to look at that. I'd rather look at, show me something else. And so I got I got a kind of voice from Mama saying, you sure you don't need to look at that? So I thought of it again, and then I was presented with a memory from the age of 11 or 12, where I was I'd went out to my stepfather had a garage away from the house, concrete block garage with the typical slidey down door, and he'd been out drinking probably at lunchtime or something with his suck up cousin basically. And at one point I walked to the back of the garage and they shut the door on me in the pitch black, and obviously that really scared the shit out of me. And then I was banging on the door and they just left me locked in there, finding it highly amusing. And then, I heard them walk away and I thought I was just stuck in this garage, and I didn't know as a kid then that how to open the garage door in the dark with the cord or whatever. And banging on the door and getting to the point of panic and extreme fear and crying, and that was a really powerful memory. So for me, that was probably, again, being shown a very early route of trauma given, passed to me by my stepfather, and with the idea that that's just one day of the next, from 11 to 18, when I was finally sort of, kicked out of the house when my mother and him moved. So that just one day of all of those years is an example of probably what else I've gone through when, like in many stepfathers' cases, it's difficult for a father to bond to a child that's not their own, especially a boy, especially if you're radically different from that person, which I was from him. And being a very sensitive kid, and that level of resentment was just pervasive. It was just all the time, So I understand much better, like my elder sister's situation, as being relatively the unwanted child, by my mother's hand, because my elder sister was hated by my mother, whereas the other sister was the favorite. And this is common in psychology. If you read books on psychology with case reviews and stuff, it's called the golden child and black sheep, where one sibling is the favorite and the other one's hated. And that hatred, becomes internalized for the child that's the black sheep. And that manifests damage in many ways because of the cortisol that's produced, of having the continuous fight-flight mechanism triggered, which is why my older sister's been so physically damaged now, especially now she's in her late 60s. From an early age, she had a complicated, rare thyroid disorder. In later life, she had an esophageal problem. But anyway, So going back to the ceremony again, very strong visuals that night. And then, of course, it's a really hard night. And then in the morning, after they close the ceremony with the liquid tobacco, and then the sun's coming up, and then it's time for Cambo, which you're kind of relieved about once you've woken up a bit. And right, we got Cambo, but you're still very drained, and still some people feeling a bit nauseous, and there's no food, so you're very shaky. And then we have to go through the Cambo, which I don't know. I might as well show it now while I think about it. But this is, something I'm really proud of now. I don't know if you can see in this light, but there's the 3 Cambo ceremonies, 2 dots of 4 and 1 dot of 5, because you build up tolerance apparently to Cambo relatively quickly. So the last ceremony, the 28th, the Cambo on that day was 5 dots, not 4. And I love Cambo. It's again, it's not pleasant, it's vomiting, but it's quick. It's all over and done, and you purge, because you drink a lot of water. And the Cambo is instantaneous, as I've explained before. As soon as it's put on your arm, you can start to feel it come on, either with pressure in the head. But the last one wasn't bad at all. And just keep drinking water, have a pain in the stomach in my case. But it didn't go right the way through this time for diarrhea. It was... I had to put my fingers down my throat, and because one of the important things about deep purging is trying to get that bile out, the yellow, horrible shit. Because as Mira explained, there are so many toxic chemicals in our environment, and heavy metals particularly, they bind to stick to the certain cells in your body and certain organs more so than others. And he said he's seen people in Kambo ceremonies vomiting up so much bile, and it's been almost fluorescent green. There's that much toxicity in it. Whereas if you can get that yellow stuff out, it looks a bit eggy, and obviously bile tastes horrible, as we all know. And after a couple of vomits, usually say 3 purges through the period of the Kambo ceremony, and then there comes a point, that final purge is the final release for that session, and then you start to just feel right, like you've really got some negative shit out, and then all the colors just seem that little bit brighter. Nature looks beautiful, and you just feel like that relative contentment. I still had to go and lie down for a couple of hours afterwards, and I just didn't fancy breakfast at that point, so I missed breakfast. But went back for lunch. So it's a very powerful combination of having a long night ceremony, of the way they do it here. It's a very, very different. The songs, as usual, they didn't seem quite as nice to me that night, but I said they're still nice. Jana's got a beautiful voice, and they play just such beautiful instruments. They've got one that's like almost like 2 turtle shells. It's like a similar sound in some ways to I don't know. It's just a beautiful plucked harp kind of instrument, but it's got a long neck with pegs like this down, with so many strings coming off it, and it's played finger style. And of course, she sings beautiful Icaros with this thing. And they've got other instruments. And in that state, I haven't even bothered, even as an ex-musician, to be interested in the instruments, because it's a ceremony. You got too many other things on your mind. But very powerful combination having Kambo, and they say that the Kambo and ayahuasca work really well together, because the ayahuasca's already done a lot of purging, and you're spiritually open as well to receive yet another medicine. And he also explained this time, which was interesting, that because I said before that sometimes to take the secretion, the poison, the toxic secretion off the back of the poison arrow frog, in a lot of cases they have to stress the frog. But he said there's another technique now that they don't stress the frog, which is nice. They tickle it with a feather, but it's much more gentle on the frog, and just so that the frog doesn't have such a bad time of it, but it still secretes the toxin, which then they can scrape off. And this is what they put on the little flat wooden stick, and then it dries. And so you can carry it around. And here, I looked on the floor, he put them next to me at one point when I was sitting on the stool, and they had quite a few sticks with the Kambo on. But this same length stick, I'd seen a guy in Peru at the hospedaje that I was staying, a really nice French guy, and he'd done a jungle trip and spoken to the guide, who then sent his wife around later on, and for 100 soles, which was $25 US. The wife came around and he gave her the money and dropped her a stick, and he was going off to Colombia. And he was a pretty switched on guy. He knew what he was doing. He's had previous experience with plant medicine. He was explaining to me when he bought it, and that's the first time I saw it, just the stick, and he explained to me that there was enough for 10 doses of Kambo on this one stick. And, so you just take an area, a tenth of the whole distance along, and you have another little piece of wood, like a wedge, and you just put a bit of spit on the area for that one administration, and mix it again to make it moist. And what Mira had was just a little penknife with a small blade, and he just used that to scrape it off the stick, and then just wipe it on each of the dots, which then goes after they clean the initial burn or say dust from the the incense stick that they use to put the little burns on your arm. So but that's why I like Kambo, because you can feel pretty unpleasant for a while, but it's over so quick compared to San Pedro, 10 hours of a San Pedro ceremony, so, and you get the relief is just there afterwards. You just feel so purged and so relieved, and you just feel really good for the rest of the day then, so that's that was pretty much ceremony 28. That's the other thing I wanted to mention, because I also learned about the effect of just the ayahuasca in the combined effect from the normal ayahuasca, where you get the visions and everything else and the nausea, and having had so much experience, you go for a walk for a pee, you're really can be really wobbly. And it was a really strong brew on the 28th ceremony. But because I'd had the raw ayahuasca first and felt really fine, but at one point when I did get up to go for a pee, it was one of the wobbliest walks. Jesus, man, it was just so quite trippy. But only when I stood up and went, I couldn't find my feet. My balance was all over the place. And so that's just the raw ayahuasca component. So now I realize that it's the ayahuasca that's pretty much responsible for that wobbly trippiness. But the visual side of it, obviously, is the chacruna in the mix, which gives the deep spiritual visions that you possibly experienced in an ayahuasca ceremony. So very interesting to have the two different types in one night. And of course, Yana had said to me at the previous ceremony, she said, the next morning, the 27th ceremony, she said to me, come and see me at the house at some point. And they've got a ceremony this next Thursday, which is great. So I'm going to stay around Vilcabamba and stay here because Mira's gone away to the jungle for a while, for a few days, but he'll be back next Thursday now. So I'm going to be doing another ceremony, a last ceremony with them, and then I'll see Jimena and Santiago again at some point for the contact, which is the way Aya works. You get given your next step in the path. You just got to, wait for the appropriate moment, and it'll be revealed to you. And that's happened through the whole of this last 8-month journey. Sooner or later, after a couple of weeks even, I'll meet somebody that says, "Oh, I've got a shaman, I'm doing the ceremony, do you want to come along?" But this one's really important because they're friends of Jimena's, so I've got, absolute trust. So she said, "I know a lovely shamana in Colombia, so we'll give the details." Because I said, I don't know what to do next. I'd like to do a dieta at some point, probably in Colombia. And she said, I've got the perfect situation for you. She said, "I've got a really good shamana friend, so I know that, there's the verification. Personal recommendation is always the way to go if you're going to have private ayahuasca treatment, which of course you still have ayahuasca ceremonies on a dieta, but they're usually very, very mild because you don't need a full-blown ceremony as such. Because, well, in my past experience with in Peru on dietas, because depending on the plant, you might have one or two short, much milder, more smoother ceremonies that aren't very long, because they're just taking a little bit of negativity out. Because you're on a dieta, you get opened on the first night. You have a ceremony to open you up to the plant spirit, and then dawn, as the sun comes up the next morning, depending on how they've prepared that plant drink, which is in Peru was aguardiente, which is raw alcohol, cane alcohol, that's put in a bottle with the actual plant, depending what plant it is. It could be the leaves, it could be the stalks, it could be the roots. And then you have a slug of that at 5 a.m. And what I used to do is try and get back to sleep, because you've got so much time in 2 weeks with nothing to do. And depending on how the plant spirit hits you, which plant it is, it can have different effects. But you don't feel like you're on anything for the whole of the dieta, apart from the ceremonies, because then you're on ayahuasca, just for short ceremonies. And then the rest of the time, it's very much an introspective thing on dietas. A lot of self-introspection. You go back through the whole history of your life, lots of memories. You can have a couple of bad days and followed by a good day. Depends, like if there's irritability or anger still to come out. You get irritated by mosquitoes. You can't do anything. You feel plagued by them. Just, fuck, I wish the fucking things would leave me alone. And then you'll have a couple of days. Because again, you're reliving some of these negative experiences, but under the influence of the plant spirit, in which case it's marked for deletion, if you like, but it doesn't actually, it's not removed, but it's locked in this Pandora's box. It seems that's how it seems to work. And the reasoning for that is if you break your magic, the box opens again. And everything up to that point, which is why alcohol is such a big no-no with ayahuasca. It's absolutely off the table. And that's why in the last retreat, Clementina said to me once, they fixed me after that last illness in Mankara. she said, oh, we think we're okay. We'll be able to get you back. And she did the first ceremony. I felt like I was welcome back, as I've explained in other videos, I think. And so that was a big relief. And I hadn't wasted all the previous 4 months, and just been like starting all over again. I got reconnected. The anxiety went away after the first ceremony, but she said to me in no uncertain terms, she said, if you drink alcohol ever again, you will die. And alcohol and ayahuasca. Mama ayahuasca does not like alcohol, in excess. Because if you get ill on top, you're in big trouble. And that's how I ended up in the two medical centers in Mankara. So there's a warning for anybody who thinks that they can just come and do a retreat and then go back to, fall back into their own ways too quick, going on and end up on a bender or something, it's a serious business because you're risking your life. So just be aware.